Welcome to yet another episode of our Torah Talks, Chazaq's Tuesday night programs with special guests. Tonight we have with us a very special guest, a very dear friend of Chazaq, the Executive Director of Agudat Israel of America, Rabbi Labish Becker. Shlita Rabbi, welcome. Shalom Aleichem. Oh, what an honor it is to have you here at our headquarters. How you doing, Rabbi? Everything's good?
It's wonderful to be here at the center, the nerve center of Klal Yisrael. I'm very excited.
Thanks. And tonight's topic is really exciting. Daf Yomi, the great Unifier. Right. And we're talking to Rabbi Daf Yomi. And I got to tell you that Rabbi Labish Becker is the one that got Chazaq involved with the whole Daf Yomi movement, Baruch Hashem, with our shiurim and programs. We have it every single day, Baruch Hashem. It's going very, very strong. And before we jump into the topic, Rabbi, if you give our audience a little bit of a background, a little bit about yourself and the great work you're involved with.
Sure. So we'll start with me, I guess. We'll start at the beginning. And I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And my father was a Rav there for 40 years. He came from Poland, and he learned by Reb Shimon Shkop, which is a famous Reb Shimon Shkop, and in Volozhin. As a matter of fact, he told me an interesting thing. We're talking about Kavod HaTorah, and he said when he learned the Bialystok when he was 11 years old, the people of the city stood up for the Bachrim. 11 years old of Kavod HaTorah, because they appreciated what Torah is. And that's really, we're going to get into Daf Yomi soon, and we'll see that's really Kavod HaTorah, the entire concept of Daf Yomi. So Baruch Hashem, so I grew up in Milwaukee. I went to Telz Yeshiva in Chicago. I was in the Mir in Eretz Yisrael by Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, and then I went to Lakewood. And for Kyle, I was in the Mir in New York. And then what happened, a very interesting thing. I was flying to Milwaukee for Pesach. My father, Olav Shalom, was not well at that time, and I was flying back. And there was a middle-aged man on the plane, and he calls me over and says, "Younger man, come and talk to me." And my wife said at that moment she should have known what the rest of life was going to be like, because I left her. I apologized. Left her and my 2-year-old son. And I went and I sat next to him, and he asked me, he says, I said, "What are you doing here?" So he says, "There's a Mr. Schwartz from South America who came to Milwaukee to have a heart operation, and I'm flying from New York for 2 hours to Bimvakar Chayla, and then I'm going back to New York." And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "My father, and I'm in the Mir Kyle." And he says, "Are you looking to go out of Kyle to do something?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to go some sort of cloud work or Rebbe or something." So he tells me, he says, "You seem like a fine younger man." He says, "Go to the Aguda, to Shmuel Bloom, and tell him that Benny Fishoff sent you."
Oh, wow.
Benny Fishoff, as you know, was the chairman of the board of Agudat Israel for 50 years. So
my uncle's neighbor.
Oh, right. He lived right here in Queens.
Right, yeah.
So the Bashert, I was thinking about it, and I wrote an article called "Shidduch Made in Heaven," because literally it was up in the airplane, and it was wild. You think of it, a man from South America, of all places, comes to all places in Milwaukee, which is I didn't even know they had heart hospitals,
Wow.
and a man comes for 2 hours. I happened to be on that plane, and in those days there weren't a lot of from people on planes to Milwaukee. I meet the chairman of the board of the Aguda, and he tells me, "Go to the Aguda and get your job." And I did. I came to the Aguda. I met Rabbi Bloom. I met 5 different people. I ended up at Rabbi Sher's office, and Rabbi Sher says to me, he says, "If you come and you work here, you'll influence thousands of people." That was, he told me. And I thought he was like a little bit,
exaggerating.
But boy, was he right.
Unbelievable.
So Baruch Hashem, and they got me. I started out with Torah projects. Baruch Hashem, one of the accomplishments is the Shir by Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. We started that Shir with 12 people. Motzei Shabbat Shir.
Oh my gosh.
And I went around to all my friends. I said, "I'm starting a new Shir, and I don't want to be embarrassed. Can you come one time?" "Oh, I got to come one time." And when he finished that Shir, they came back and he said, "We've never heard a show like this in our life." Some of them are still there 38 years later, or whatever. So
unbelievable.
So that's So that's what I've been involved with in the Torah aspects, the youth, and B'chal, building Agudat Yisrael around the country. Those have been the areas in which I've had the schus of being all of these years, and here.
Baruch Hashem, unbelievable.
It's been wonderful.
That story is unreal. Isn't it amazing? Just out of nowhere. You should go.
It's the word. It's like Bashert squared. You know,
100%. What are the chances? Wow.
Yeah, what are the chances? Exactly.
What did he see? Like, out of nowhere, Benny Fish. I was like,
Benny Fishoff is sitting on a plane to Milwaukee. It's probably the only time in his life, he probably never heard of Milwaukee. You know what I mean? He went there one time in his life. I was there.
Very, very powerful. Very, very good. Everything's min Hashem, everything's from heaven. And
that's why we're here.
That's why we're here at Baruch Hashem. So before we get to the topic of, today, Daf Yomi, let's take it back to the origins of Daf Yomi. How did it all start? What's the history? So we've all heard about Rabbi Shapiro being the one behind it, but Rabbi, you probably know the best.
Right. So I have a great schus. My grandfather was known as the Ozher of a Rebbe, the Ber Moshe, and he wrote a sefer, the Ber Moshe, in the age dos, and he grew up in Poland, and in that neck of the woods, I guess, he came from a city called Ozherov, and he knew Rameir Shapiro, and they were friends, and they came in 1921 as part of the first mishlachas to help bring Agudas Yisrael to America. In 1923, Rameir Shapiro was 33 years old. He had not founded Lublina Yeshiva yet. He was a Rav of a city. I don't remember the name of the city. He was a Rav of a city. And he came to the Chafetz Chaim, and he had an idea. And he had the idea of the Daf Yomi. And when he spoke about the Daf Yomi, so what he said was, and this is why we call it the Great Unifier, what Rameir Shapiro said in his original speech was, let's take a look at the Daf of the Gemara. The Daf of the Gemara was written in Bavel. Rashi is from France. Tosfos is from Germany, right? The Rif was from North Africa. The Ran was from Spain. The Rishash was from Poland. I mean, if you go, the Vilna Gaon was from Lithuania. I mean, you name it. Maybe nobody was from Japan. I don't know. Maybe there was. So he said, this is what Daf Yomi is going to be. It's going to unify the world. He said, we're going to make a shir that, and he said this, if you go to Australia, however you say it, you will be able to sit down, and I've done it, by the way, it works. You'll sit down in a shir, and you'll be one of the guys.
On the same page.
Yeah. And you'll be literally on the same page. Literally on the same page. And it works. You go into any shir anywhere. So he brought this to the Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim, being the genius that he was, immediately understood and seized it. And he says, I want you to present this. Right then was the Kasiyah Gedolah, the first Kasiyah Gedolah of Agudas Yisrael. When you come to the office in Yetz Hashem,
I've been there. I've seen the pictures.
You saw the picture of the Kasiyah Gedolah. It was very impressive. And he says, I want you to present it.
Wow.
He said, but listen to this. What he said, I want you to come late.
Come late.
I want you to come late. Rameir Shapiro says, come late. How can I come late? All these great rabbis, all these great rabbanim are sitting on the dais. I'm a 33-year-old young man. I'm going to come late. He said, trust me, walk in late. So they're all sitting there, and we've all seen the picture of the Chafetz Chaim. Remember that video that went around a couple of years ago? So you saw the Chafetz Chaim. That was going to that Knesset Gedolah live. That's why, by the way, you see all the pictures of the people, and they're looking at the camera because they're waiting for them to take the picture. Real movie cameras. So Rameir Shapiro comes in. They're all sitting down. Everybody's there. And Rameir Shapiro comes in, and the Chafetz Chaim stands up for him. And the place went nuts. The Chafetz Chaim stood up for this young man. He had a black beard, a beautiful, nice black beard, and everybody stood up.
Wow.
That was because what the Chafetz Chaim was worried. We all know that we just read the Haggadah, right? So what did we learn? Rabbi Labish Becker, I'm like 70 years. Why? What does that mean? They said because he was 18, and they wanted to make him the head of the Beis Din of the Sanhedrin. And he said, on the 18th, they're going to laugh at me. So he saw Hashem made that he should have 18 rows, different pshatim. He had to look older. So he knew that Rameir Shapiro, all the older people are going to say, who is he?
Yeah, what does he think he is?
What does he think he is? But once the Chafetz Chaim stuck for him, that was it. That's why he wanted to come.
The greatness of the Chafetz Chaim.
That was the greatness of the Chafetz Chaim, that he thought of this. This is the Chafetz Chaim's like, ooh. So he thought of it, so he came in, and he had this booming, deep voice. Wow. So you remember, they didn't have microphones in those days, right? And they have thousands of people. Rameir Shapiro stands there. Right, and he's inspiring. He was a spellbinding orator. He was able to speak in everyone, and he told this over, what I just said, about this is going to unify Klal Yisrael.
And this was where the idea of
Daf Yomi at that moment, and I read newspaper accounts of it. it set the place on fire. Sometimes you have a good idea, but it takes a while till they get it. The place went on fire. They said right away, "Whoa,
we're in."
They understood it and they were in.
So they started that day, that night.
No, here's the story. The story continues. That's not over yet, because as we all know, you're in the Chazaq is Chizuk. So as you all know, the Chizuk lasts for an hour,
a few minutes.
You need a few minutes.
You need
a day.
Continence break.
Yeah, right. You have to grab it while it's hot. That's what I remember. Rabbi Fran to see him shots. Remember, seize the moment, cherish the moment. Grab it.
I still hear it.
So between the Kasiyah Gedola and the beginning of Daf Yomi, because they were starting for Rosh Hashanah of that year. So it was about 3 months, because the Kasiyah Gedola was around this time.
That's
of the year.
a very long time period from the inspiration to last.
Right, exactly. And they had no way of, there wasn't the type of means we have. So what happened was, on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, the Daf Yomi, despite the idea, and you can have a great idea, but it was sort of hanging in the balance. And then something happened that made Daf Yomi forever. In those days, the Ger Hasidim had over 100,000 Hasidim in Europe. Unfortunately, Nebuchadnezzar, I don't have to tell you that. And the Ger Rebbe was one of the legendary. First, he was one of the founders of the Gudas Yisrael, together with the Chafetz Chaim and Reb Chaim Meisen, the Charkover Rebbe. And he said, after Mincha, he tells his Gabbai, "Go to the Sorim Shank and get me a Brachas Gemara. I'm starting Daf Yomi right now." Now, if you know what a Rebbe is like,
everyone follows.
They run. They literally fly off the shelves. When they say they fly off the shelves, they flew off the shelves, and within minutes, the whole place learned Daf Yomi. And that's what made Daf Yomi. That's what launched it and turned the idea into the concrete, because of what the Ger Rebbe did. And then they started printing it, and they made the dafim. I mean, now I remember before the art school started, the Aguda used to print a little shas. There were these little. I should have brought you one. It would be nice to have show and tell. We were showing. I didn't think of it. Anyway, they had little gemaras that the Aguda used to print in order people should be able to learn it on the trains, on the buses,
the way to work,
and so
wherever they are.
Yeah, so wherever they are. So
that's the origins. That's how it all started.
Yeah,
going back 1923.
So wait a second.
Wow.
Next year is the 100th anniversary of the Daf Yomi. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Then it just
2023. Wow.
2023, right. we were talking about you being born in 18. So it's a 100th anniversary. It's 100 years that the Daf Yomi, next year will be the 100th anniversary of Daf Yomi. Unbelievable. So that's how it got started. But the history of Daf Yomi itself is totally fascinating of how it grew.
So that's what I wanted to ask you. So with what I understand, I remember the siyum we had for the siyum. We had a siyum Shas, of course. Then we had the siyum Masechet Brachot right before COVID. And you remember you were the guest speaker. It was packed. It was a full house.
Oh, it was so exciting.
And the excitement is still going on. Heavy. The dancing
was
the energy was amazing. And I remember vividly that you said that when you got involved with the Gura, the first siyum, you had approximately 5,000 people there, more or less. And today we know Kenai I'm saying aside from MetLife Stadium, which is close to 100,000 people, and this year this past siyum there was the Barclays Center as well. And then all over the world, I think the estimate is 500,000 people.
500,000 people.
So Rabbi Becker, just to speak to the man behind it, again, he's not going to take the credit for it. I know there's a lot of great people involved with it. But Baruch Hashem, from 5,000 to 500,000. How did that growth happen? Guide us through the way.
Okay, sure. So let's go back to Europe.
Yeah.
Because the Daf Yomi actually went through a sadly almost near death, and then had a renaissance through the Holocaust. Yeah. But what happened in 1930 was the first siyum of the Daf Yomi.
Right,
and it took place. It was 1920, 1930. It's very interesting. I didn't realize until recently. I mentioned to you my grandfather was a friend of Meir Shapiro. In 1930, he made a siyum hashas for the 10th time.
Wow, your grandfather?
My grandfather learned Shas 10 times. There's a picture in the Bronx. The Vada Rabbanim of the Bronx sent out an invitation. The Ozra Rebbe 10 times. And I always thought it was beautiful. He did 10 times. Never thought about it until I realized that was in 1930. Maybe it was a gift to his friend, Meir Shapiro. You never know.
So your grandfather finished for the 10th time, and many people that joined the Daf Yomi did it
that
for
was
the
their first time. To see
was
it
a big event?
Yes, it was thousands of pictures. There's pictures of it. There's a book you're gonna have to come to the office again. I will give you all the material because if you read it, it's wonderful and it's so inspired. But there's pictures of the first Siyum where Meir Shapiro spoke.
Wow.
This was his.
I can just imagine the
felt.
days of all the Gedolim.
Oh yeah, and there's a picture of him standing on like the balcony of the Lubliner Yeshiva. If you've ever been there, it's a very impressive building. By that time he had Lubliner Yeshiva, and they had thousands of people.
So the Siyum was in the Lubliner
Right.
Yeshiva?
Yeah,
Oh,
it was in
wow.
Lubliner Yeshiva. The next Siyum was already in the sad time. It was 1938, and it was right before the war. So already it was subdued. In other words,
Right.
you're not going to make. Everyone knows. We people think that people did not know what was coming. People knew what was coming. They
Right.
knew, and they tried to get out. Many of them, and unfortunately,
There was no Siyum for the
there was
cycle?
there was a Siyum, but there was a subdued
Very small.
Siyum. Yeah, it was a small Siyum. They didn't make it like a big thing. 1946 was the next Siyum. That was right after the war.
Right.
So again, it was, and there were very few people learning Daf Yomi. That was when the Holocaust survivors just rebuilding themselves and coming to America. There were some Daf Yomi Shurim, but it wasn't a major thing. As a matter of fact, I can only say I heard this, that at the 1960 dinner of Agudas Yisrael, that Rabban Kotler, the great Rabban Kotler, got up and said, Mazel Tov to the Daf Yomi learners, tonight's Tzim Shas.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the dinner, because there was nothing doing. So, by 1968, already there was shurim going on. They started to rebuild. There were people now. These survivors were in Borough Park, and they all started making shurim, and they started learning together. And it started, there were people in other cities as well. Chicago, Los Angeles started to build up all of these places. Everywhere there was a shul. They started to be a daf. It started to grow, and they made a siyum I was told in 1968 in the Beis Yaakov of Borough Park.
Oh, wow.
For like 300 people.
This was the Good Israel of America?
This was there was a Rabbi Lish at that time. I'm not sure, this was before my time, so I don't know, I was a kid. So even I was a kid at some point.
Really?
So I don't know if it was the Aguda. The Aguda was probably involved. I'm sure Rabbi Borkhardt, the Daf Yomi is the Daf Yomi Commission was founded by this Rabbi Lish and Rabbi Chazaq Besser. That was already in either the late 60s or in the 70s. They founded the Daf Yomi Commission, whose job was to propagate Daf Yomi, put ads, make these Gemaras, get the word out. So the publicity started at that point, and that really helped it grow. Now, as we know from the Gemara, you're in Talmud Chacham, you learn Daf Yomi, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course, Daf Yomi is one of the best things I did.
That is, I don't have to sell you, but you know that it says that Abaye said that when I hear that they're making the Tzur Rabbanan are finishing Masechta Avitz Rabbanan, what's it, Simon Tevel Rabbanan, I make for the Rabbanan, I make a Siyum. The concept of Siyum is already in the Gemara, right? So that time, why do they make a Siyum? Because there's nothing like a Siyum that makes you want to do it. I cannot tell you how many people told me they finished Shas once, twice, 3, 4 times, all because of Zima Shas.
Of course, definitely that energy over there is just unbelievable. You don't want to just be a spectator, but you want to be a part of it.
That's 100%. Some people, a group came from Baltimore, and I remember the guy telling me, he says, we drove from Baltimore, and on our way there, we're going to go to Zima Shas, it's going to be fun. Yeah. On the way back, we said to ourselves, we can't go to the next one like this. We got to be part of this. We got to be part of it. And they did. Wow. They learned shots together. So once you start,
you can't stop.
It's like addictive,
Very addictive.
you got.
I can't end my day until I have that daf done with. It's
right.
Like a must.
Yomi Tov Rabban. That was no.
1968, we're up to Beis Yaakov, 300 people.
Wow, 300 people. And then 1975, so let's keep going. 1975, they moved it.
By the way, it's every 7.5 years.
Every 7, right. 7. Oh, that's right. We should make, right. It takes it 20. Let's go down to some of the basics. Yeah. The Talmud is 2,711 pages. That means both sides.
I always remember by thinking about 2 7-Elevens.
By the way, it wasn't always 2711. In 1968, it changed. They added 11 blot. They added 11 daf. Because there was one Masechta, there was one tractate called Shkolim. Shkolim deals with giving the money to the base of Migdash. Everybody gives a half a shekel. You remember the parts you did. You give parts of Shkolim, and you give a half a shekel, and it was too hard to learn. It's Yerushalmi, and it's very dense, and people complain they can't do it in 13 days. So they went to the Metzger Gedolei Torah of that time, And Rabbi Bloom tells me this story, Shmuel Bloom, because it was his uncle.
Oh.
And they went to Metzah and said, we can't do it. Please allow it to go to the other Shas from Slavita to Vilna. There was the Slavita was friends from Meir Shapiro, so it was the Slavita Shas that was used for the Seder of Daf Yomi. That's why it's Be'er Yom Sukkah and so on.
Right.
But that Masechta, they went to the Vilna, so it's 24 blot.
Mm.
So 11 blot were added. So it was actually 2,700 when they started. They added 11 blot at that point. So it's a little a fun fact.
Fun fact
of Daf Yomi, So anyway, so they went to what's called the Manhattan Center. It's still there on 34th Street and like 7th and 8th
How
Avenue.
many people were there?
It's about 1,200.
1,200. Wow.
Now it's starting to grow.
So from 300 to 1,200.
To 300, from zero, 68, from 300 to 1,200, and 60 was zero. So
That's
it
right.
went, so it's now up to 1,200. Enter me. So
Bad time.
So here, my first one was 1982. So here's what happens in 1982. There's a nice story that goes with it. So I was standing in what looked to me the biggest hall I've seen in my entire life. Remember from walking, So
Right,
you know what I mean?
Different world.
Yeah, right. It's a much smaller place. So we're looking at this, and there's all these seats, and I'm there with Rabbi Borchardt and Rabbi Besser, and we're deciding, what do we do if we don't fill it up? It's gonna be like an embarrassment,
Right.
What.
Right.
So we decided we'd tell everyone's under construction. We'll put up sheets over some of the seats,
Oh, to cover
so
it.
we can cover them up. And we tell them that's So what happened is that Rabbi Sher Zatzal, Rabbi Moshe Sher, came up with an idea, and he said people like to be invited to something. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a ticket that says, admit one.
Oh, wow.
So they made tickets, 10,000. They figured 10,000 tickets will be...
10,000 seats in this area?
No, there's only 4.5. But you assume that, how it is.
Yeah, people don't show up.
It's like people do coupons,
Yes,
for the supermarket. You assume a certain level. You figure
Very smart.
4,500 seats, 10,000 should be fine. Well, guess
Sure.
what? We underestimated Klal Yisrael because they all came, and we had about 4,000 people standing outside waving their ticket. But I got a ticket, says admit one.
God.
And amongst them was our very own Rabbi Avram Nissim Pearl.
Oh, wow.
Who remembers waving his ticket. They're all waving. And they wouldn't let the staff outside of the hall because they were afraid they'd rip us apart if we walked outside. So we had to stay inside because there were all these people. But what it showed us is the love of Klal Yisrael for Torah.
The thirst
The
for Torah.
total love for Torah, that this is, we knew we made a mistake. There's no amount you can plan big enough for a single shop. That's where we learned that lesson. So, but we were still in small mode because, first of all, the next Siyum was 1990. We'll get to the grant. In 1990, and that we did, we went upstairs to the Madison Square Garden, which is 20,000 seats.
Wow.
Plus we had a 4,500 seat. We go for 25,000. Now we're going again. The first time we multiplied from 1,200 to 5,000. That's 4 times.
Right.
Now we're going from 4,000 to 20,000. It's 5 times.
Yeah.
We're really taking a risk, and the numbers are big, and we're again, trembling, trying to do and also there was no internet. There was no, the people who were there. We did it in other cities, but there was no connection between them really. And Baruch Hashem, it filled up. 20,000 people, 25,000 people packed.
Madison Square Garden.
Madison Square Garden, the first time Madison Square Garden, now to us, Madison Square Garden, wow, it was so beautiful. And that's when Rav Schwab spoke.
Wow.
And you had Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in 1982. These were the Gedolim who spoke at this, the Kloisenberger Rebbe. And in 1975, by the way, they made the Siyum dedicated to the survived, to the Holocaust, to those who died,
Right.
especially the children. And I'll never forget I can cry when I say it. I hope I can say it. Rav Schwab, the last Masechta, the last parak in Shasa Tinaikis. And Rav Schwab told the story of the man standing outside the gas chamber with his little boy. And his little boy said, Tati, did I do anything wrong to be punished like this? And everybody was like, just cry. You heard the way Rav Schwab said it. Rav Schwab went, he knows, he knew of what he spoke. He grew up in Germany. He knew what was dealing with them in there. So the scene was always, and then we started programs for Kinderlach in schools to learn on behalf of the children who died in the Holocaust.
Wow.
And we have a whole program that we did each
Mishnayos, no?
Mishnayos.
Right.
We had one time we put out a book from the Rishonim to Sinai. They should know what Shas is all about. Remember, a kid doesn't know Shas. I mean, even if you learn Gemara, it doesn't mean you know the history of Shas.
Right.
Do you know who Rav Ashi was? Do you know who Rebbe was? This is a history. To know the history. Shas is amazing. When I spoke there at the Siyum by Chazaq. So one of the things I spoke about is get to know the Tanoim and Amoraim, learn their lives. You can learn so much from them. They're not just dry bones saying things. The same way that the Gemara is alive, let the Tanoim and Amoraim become alive. Understand that when they said that, why they said that, who they were.
So you have these programs in the schools and
in
the
the
children
schools,
learning, and when they grow up, they're going to do Daf Yomi, and they're going to have a better grip on it.
And they'll understand, where they're coming from. And you learn better, by the way. Your actual understanding, if you understand why the Brisa was written after the Mishnah, what the relationship between Brisa is, and what the relationship of the Gemara is to the Brisa, and you understand, like one of the things, I'll give you an example. It says, the Gemara always starts with something the Mishnah says what seems to be a straight halacha.
Right.
And then by the time you get to the Gemara, it's some this, and it's some like far-fetched case, and you say, that's what they meant? And you don't understand it. And the answer is yes. Because if you know the history, you know that originally nothing was written. And they only wrote down what needed to be known. But the halachas that everybody knew, you didn't have to write down. Right? So I don't have to tell you before you make kiddush, breathe. Take a breath. So you should be able to you got to tell me. I know that.
Right.
So they knew all of the halachas. The only part in the Mishnah is the part they didn't know. And that's why the case is such an interesting case. And then the same thing with the Gemara. The Gemara assumes a certain knowledge, and the same thing not right until we get to our time.
Right.
Art school, right? They also assume you have certain knowledge you don't.
Right.
Come back in 100 years from now.
There's going to be
you're going to have to explain art scroll. You're going to have the appearance on the bottom because nobody knows what art scroll talks. But that's the history. So the kids now start to understand it. So when they learn, they're learning is a whole different understanding.
Yep.
And they see it's an integrated unit. It's not just like so let's I don't want
This is part of Daf Yomi Commission and Torah projects.
There's all part of it's all together.
All
Daf Yomi, it's Daf Yomi Commission Torah project. We all work
amazing
together,
hand
in hand, and
so
Pirchei also works hand in hand. These are all this is all the Torah divisions that go to. So Pirchei, and also we did for the Benos. That when they came to see him, they took on like Tillim campaigns.
Yeah, my daughters go to
everybody got involved. We want all the kids to be involved. We want them to be part of it, right?
Make it into a family thing.
Very much. So as we grew in our understanding of Daf, we spread out ourselves. So in 1997, we already Manasquare was too small.
25,000 is
25,000.
What's 25,000?
So two things happened in 97. One is we took the NASA Coliseum out here in Long Island.
Yeah.
And two, that's when we started satellite transmission.
Wow.
Now, if you know how satellite
works, the numbers in NASA?
So NASA was about 17,000.
What? So that went down?
That was full. No, the 25
was
plus
in addition to Madison Square Garden.
Right,
wow.
That's the overflow. 25 plus 17.
That's amazing.
And plus, for the first time, because satellite technology was very expensive, because the way a satellite works, and this will give you a little science lesson, there's a curvature of the Earth. So if I have a satellite over here, I have to beam it to here, but it only goes this far. To get here, I have to have another satellite.
Oh, wow.
So you have to hire to go to, let's say, if it's not in the same time zone, you may have to hire a bunch of satellites. So it's very expensive, but we did it. We had in Los Angeles, we had in Chicago, we had in Miami, and each one had 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. It started to just explode, but we're not done. Because then in 2005, we started going, that's already when the internet started to come in, and the satellite got a little bit cheaper. That's when we started to go international. That's when we started to have Lublin, and in Europe we had sites, and we had sites in South Africa. We went everywhere, and in the United States, we went to Continental Arena, which was bigger, and then what happened is, very interesting, 10 days before the Siyum, the pressure got so great for tickets, we opened up the Javits Center.
Wow.
And we had another 10,000 people who sold tickets in 1 week.
Wait, how many people were in the Continental?
Continental was about another 22. Madison was 25. NASA Coliseum at that time had about 15. I mean,
it's so hard to do one location, but I imagine running three at the same time.
Let me tell you something. Right, so we had an integrated program. We're part of the programs from Continental, part of the programs from, and that was nerve-wracking. I cannot begin to tell you. I was involved in trying to coordinate it, and it was, we had it ready in case it fails, because we never did it before.
Backup.
And the companies that we hired a company that did international sports events, so they were used to doing this. But we had backup. We had a speaker ready to speak, or the speaker should speak twice as long in case the thing fails. And at the beginning it did. There was 5 minutes, probably maybe the worst moment of my life. Where, is this going to work? It's not going to work.
Tom, as one that organizes events, I know the feeling.
Right, oh Hashem, you daven so well. It's really, but I'm Michael, you know what I mean? I don't want to.
Definitely, wow.
But Baruch Hashem, it worked, and it was wonderful, and we had all of these other cities that started, and we started in this past Siyum, up to 2012. 2012.
Right.
Now 2012, MetLife Stadium.
90,000
in MetLife, plus around the world.
Yeah.
Now we were around the world, because the internet, we were around the world, and we had a nace. There was a nace at the Siyum. A nace at the Siyum because it was pouring.
Oh, I remember. I'm a witness to this miracle.
And pouring, and really pouring. How do I know it was really pouring? Because one of the things I was trying to take care of is when the Rabbanim came in, we had 1,200 Rabbanim there, and we were just trying to wipe off their seats.
I was doing that.
Oh, you were one of the guys helping us?
I was helping with the Rebbeim and all the Rebbeim and stuff. I was helping.
And it didn't work because it was just too wet. At 7 o'clock,
the sun comes out.
The rain stopped, and the sun came out, and everybody said, "Where's Mashiach?" Like this was a Mashiach
I'm
moment.
a witness to this.
You were a witness.
I'm a witness.
Wasn't
to this. It was
I'm talking about
unreal. It was unreal.
7 o'clock. It's pouring.
Yes.
It stops. The sun comes out. A beautiful starry night.
I was on the days I was there. I saw the Rebbeim, all the Rabbanim. I saw that all the seats were wet, and we were helping and it was unbelievable.
And then we had enough time to really dance, enough space to really dance, because the other
dancing was
beautiful. Baruch Levine Remy saying that, it was just it
feels like it was yesterday.
Does it? This is 2012. We're already 10 years ago. And then, and Baruch Hashem, this Siyum we did also. This Siyum we went back to MetLife.
But freezing cold.
I say that there was 2 years of fights because there were 2 options. Right, one option was to take 5 different places. We'd have to take every place, which would have been very expensive and a nightmare of coordination.
Right.
But everybody inside, or should we take MetLife Stadium, which is outside, and chance it?
Right.
So I'll tell you another fun fact. Fun fact that the snow season in New York is January 15th through March 1st. It rarely snows.
January 1st.
It rarely snows on January 1st.
Interesting.
Rarely snows on January 1st. So we took a chance. And we took a chance, and I got to give, Ralph Reeder pushed hard because
he's like the president.
He was CEO of the Yomi, and he pushed hard against a lot of opposition. People were like very nervous, and we did it outside, and it was cold. I can't deny that. But it was 42 degrees, and it wasn't. People made it. And one of the things that was so beautiful, we said that it was a beautiful Kiddush Hashem. I still get letters from people that say it changed my life. I had an interesting story. I get a call from a lady, and she says, "I want to thank you for my father learning Shas." And I said, "Okay, I thought she just meant the Siyum Shas." She said, "No, you."
Yeah.
And I said, "Really? What happened?" She says, "Remember 8 years ago, I called you up, and I asked you, my father at that time was 80 years old, and could you make him a chavrus to learn Daf Yomi?" And I got him a chavrus.
Wow.
And he finished Shas for the first time at 87.
Unbelievable.
Shas, 87 years old, he finished Shas. So she called to say thank you. So I said, "Thank you for reminding me." It made me feel good,
What inspiration. You can do it any time, no matter what age you are.
That's right. So the lesson is, it does not matter how old you are. The truth is, they're kids, they're teenagers who learn Daf Yomi. And you see, you go to Shir, lots of times you walk through any age.
I started as a teenager. I tried 3 cycles ago. I was in high school, and Baruch Hashem, that's more or less the same time that Chazaq started. So I did a few Masechtot, a few tractates, and then the following cycle I started as well, and then Baruch Hashem, I got married, so it was a little bit... I want to tell you something. But this time around, Baruch Hashem, we're strong. We're going full force.
Somebody complained to me that he only learned brachas, he dropped out every year after brachas. The joke used to be, Bo Shabbos, Bo Menucha, right? That was the joke. When Shabbos comes, rest comes, and you drop out.
Erevin Bechlal, totally.
Yeah, it's one of the hard. So I remember I was spoken to a certain Rav, and he says, And what's so bad if you learn brachas every 7.5 years? That's a
amazing.
huge accomplishment.
That's right.
So what's the alternative? You learn nothing?
Right.
And if you learn 700 block, whoa!
Unbelievable.
Before Daf Yomi, 700 block. Who would have thought of learning 700 block?
Unbelievable.
So it doesn't matter. Anytime you can go to the shir, go to the shir.
That's
If
right.
you're going to miss, you miss. What's one got to do with the other?
100%.
So there's really we have to get that into people's minds that any daf is a good daf. All
100%.
daf, every daf is a good daf. Any daf you can make it. Any daf you can't. That's what happens.
I don't think we mentioned that this past year, aside for the freezing cold, which was meant like stadium, but there was an additional stadium of Barclays Center.
Oh, so what happened
which was
there?
how many seats over there?
15,000.
15,000.
Oh, again.
And then there was online all over the world.
The
as
same
well.
thing happened. So two things happened. The same thing happened 2 weeks before. We ran out of space, and I cannot tell you what it's like to be in the office when people call you up.
I could relate because people were calling Chazaq because we have a
Right,
relationship
maybe
with
you get a ticket.
and we got a bunch of tickets.
What do you do when a lady starts crying and says, "My husband has been learning for 7.5 years, and I promised my children."
Oh.
And how could you not? We did have a nace in one of the previous siyum. I remember in those days. Now we could track it because obviously the technology is better. We couldn't track it, and I remember we'd lost 47 tickets. Went out, nobody knew where it was. Somehow they didn't know where it was. And a week before the siyum, it was found in an apartment building in Borough Park under a radiator.
Wow.
It had been sent out 3 months before, and it was sitting there for 3 months, somebody noticed it, and I cannot tell you how many people, 47 people I made so happy. One person, you never know, people come over and they say that I thank you for good. People, and they actually said, I thank you, 30 years ago you got me a seat, I'll never forget it.
Unbelievable.
But it goes the other way too. Before I get too happy, I have a person who told me I'm mad at you for 15 years. So I said, what did I do that you had 15 years? He said, you couldn't get me a ticket 15 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I won't forgive you unless you get me this time. This is a life event. This is every single person who goes to the Sima Shas will remember it for his whole life.
100%.
Whether you learn Daf Yomi or not, doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, we hope he does, but he will be transformed.
So I wanted to ask you. So we discussed the growth of that.
And I want to say one more thing. Then we'll get that.
And then I want to ask about the life transformation.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, so
Sure.
I'll say one more thing, and
About the growth.
this is something very, very, very important. What we did this year, we never did before. We made an offer that any Holocaust survivor who wants to come will give a free ticket.
This past scene, not
This past 2020.
I saw so many of them.
And we gave, and we had hundreds of, and along with a second ticket for anybody to, obviously they're elderly people, they have to come along with somebody, so a second ticket for a family member, and then we made the MetLife Stadium, 50 Stadium available to them so they can be warm inside. And one of the most powerful moments of the Siyum is when they all marched out onto the field,
I remember
and they sang Ani Mamin like they sang it in the camps. And I remember I just read a book where a woman wrote a book, and she wrote about the Sima Shas. And she said, I went to the Sima Shas, and that is our ultimate, that was our revenge. Revenge that I went through the Holocaust. She was even in the gas chamber, and it malfunctioned, and she got out, which has only happened twice. And in Auschwitz, and she said this is how the survivors saw it. So we don't, but the power of the Siyum. And just one more thing, we talk about the growth of the Siyum.
Yeah.
So this time we had online over 500,000 people, but we also had all over the world. We had, and these are cities that everybody knows now. We had in Minsk and Pinsk and Zhytomyr, and we had in Bialystok and all the Ukrainian cities. We had all over Poland. We all over.
I don't remember when was this
Everywhere.
last scene or the one before that where Rabbi Oben went to
Lublin.
Lublin, that's right.
And we've always made sure to have a Siyum in Lublin.
That's amazing.
And show it.
That's where it all started.
That's where it all started, and we're Makar tight. So the Siyum is unbelievable. It has grown. It will continue to grow.
What's the next scene? What are plans, Rabbi Becker? Another scene and stuff.
So I'm still recovering from this Siyum. The truth is, and we have to the entire Claudius has to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom, because COVID was already in the air. People knew about it. Had it been 1 month later, there would have been no Siyum.
That's so true.
It was one of the most amazing
miracles.
Literally a miracle that it was January 1st,
January 1st,
February 1st, or March 1st. It would have been.
People would
they would have closed it down in a second. As it is, we got the day of the Siyum. We got from a few days before. We got from the FBI saying the credible threats. We had to. They had a meeting to make sure the security of 170 security agencies.
Wow.
The security, I was told, of the Siyum Shas was the second level security, the one below a presidential visit.
Oh wow!
It was the highest level because obviously you put 100,000 Heilige Jews in one place. There's the forces of Tum aren't happy,
Threats,
and the threats. But they said, interestingly enough, they said it was easier to secure MetLife Stadium than it is to secure something in the city, because you could put a no-fly zone and you could, cut off highways. So they were very, happy about the security, and it was something that people in Yetz Hashem. What we're going to do next time, let's talk next year. I don't know.
Anybody watching that could build a massive stadium for 1 million people.
We already have MetLife, we already have Barclay. We'll probably take Prudential. Last year, what I probably is going to have is probably a MetLife plus the 5 stadium internal, because there's only one MetLife. I mean, what are you going to do?
MetLife is the biggest, I guess.
Yeah,
Wow.
or we'll build the Big Tent. I don't know.
You mentioned about the security. We all know about the Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name, how everybody was very thankful to them, and how they said usually we have people that are drunk and they're going crazy at all these games, and people were so respectful and thanking them and appreciative.
That's an amazing thing. Yeah. I remember we were standing next to back in the days of Madison Square Garden. There were two, and they were davening.
Oh, the way it's so quiet.
And there's you didn't feel that as much in MetLife because there was no roof, but in Madison Square Garden. So it was, and the guards were standing there, and they were just in awe. They said, we've never had this before. And I remember the people afterwards, the head of MetLife Stadium, we had a party afterwards, obviously, to celebrate. And he told us, he said, Rabbi, we all felt holy. And this was not a Jewish person. But he said, we all felt so holy that night. We felt this was different. This was special. We were the first event in MetLife Stadium. Then after they said the Super Bowl was that year, and they said that they used us as to practice for the Super Bowl to learn how to do it right.
Wow.
So they learned from us. They said, we learned from you how to run an event.
Look at that. Unbelievable.
So we were the very first event in MetLife Stadium was 2012 Sima Shas. And God willing, but the main thing, the Sima Shas, it seems wonderful, but Tachlis is
change our lives, to become better people, and to take upon ourselves. So could you tell us a little bit about people that, I'm sure you have so many stories from all your years.
So I was thinking, I'll just tell you one story that made a Rosham on me. There was a courtroom, and there was a lawyer in the court. I think it was downtown Brooklyn, but somewhere in New York, and there was a lawyer who was that in between sessions. The lawyer was sitting and used to learn Daf Yomi by lunch. So everybody would go out and they'd run around, and he was sitting with his Daf.
Unbelievable.
And after a certain amount of time, the judge came over to him. They said, I want to offer you to become a judge.
Oh.
And he said, what are you talking about? You don't know me. What are you talking about? So he says, I see that every day when everybody else that goes to do their frivolous things, you're sitting with your Gemara and you take it so seriously and you're studying the law. That's the type of people we want on our in the court. So if you think that people who aren't, a person who learns the daf, I remember my daughter, she's now Baruch Hashem is in her 30s. I remember her telling me once, she says, my childhood, remember you sitting at the table with your chavrusa learning the daf. The kids see it, the wife sees it, the friends see it, everybody sees it.
And it's never been so easy to do the daf from, ever before. You mentioned Art Scroll. Yeah. Besides for Art Scroll, there's
Masifta,
there's online as well.
Oh, it's
from all these different Shirim also. I'm saying there's so many different...
and now there's online, and there's apps, and oh my gosh! There's resources. We're going to come to Shemayim, and they say, we noticed you didn't learn the daf. I didn't have time. It was very hard. Oh yeah, did you ever hear of this one, that one? You heard about it, but it's going to be really rough. We're not going to have all the excuses are gone.
I'll tell you, I have some of the most interesting guys that you would never believe in the world that they're learning anything, but they're learning the daf. It's amazing. It's unbelievable, and you would never tell. And Baruch Hashem Chazaq made a revolution, and we commend you and Aguda and all those that are involved with making this historic Daf Yomi.
It's who knows? It's this Beis Hashem Hayisazos that he put in the mind of Rameir Shapiro. And there was another person at that time also came up that was in the Jewish Observer. There was somebody else who also suggested. I think they said that Rameir Shapiro had the best voice, so he got to say it was his idea too. So the whole it's 100 years. You're right. We're gonna have to come back and celebrate the 100th year. Coming up. But it's exciting. But I would say we estimate conservatively that over the years there must have been millions of people who've been involved in the daf. There was so there have been interesting places where they've done the daf. I mean, everyone knows the Long Island Railroad, the famous shear
shear
that they had on Long Island Railroad, and there's the pictures we have from the 1980s and 90s of people sitting. There's been people learning on cruises to Alaska. Somebody told me that he was there on a cruise to Alaska, and the highlight, he didn't say it was Alaska, he said the highlight was the daf. That's what he was involved in. He went to Alaska. So the daf has really been, it's portable, it's everywhere, it's in your brain. The most interesting chavrusa I've ever heard of just ended a year ago. It started in Auschwitz.
Oh wow!
There were two people. He sent me a letter about it. I think his name is Pollock. They learned in Auschwitz the entire time in Auschwitz. They learned the daf together. They continued in the DP camps. They both moved to Borough Park. They continued in Borough Park. They stopped a year ago because one of them never went blind. They couldn't.
Wow! So all these years,
but they said for 80 years,
80 years.
There have been in the constant. It's hard for us to even imagine having the yeshiva das. I mean, you hear about people that they go on business trips. I talk to people. They come home at 12 o'clock at night, and they say, "I got no choice.
Yep.
If you want to learn how to learn at 1 a.m, there's only one way to do it. Either you say shir, because you know that that's the only time you can concentrate, or you have daf yomi.
That's right.
You got to do your daf. You're in trouble because if you miss one daf, you miss one day, 2 days, you can't do it. You just got to keep going. But can you imagine they learned in Auschwitz? So if you want to talk about Mesiras Nefesh, people, there are people who I've seen go to their chavrusa during snowstorms, and people have learned, and they learned in Warsaw Ghetto. You'd hear about daf yomi. The daf yomi is just
recently
transformative.
during COVID, there was Zoom shirim. There was so many ways for people to continue, and they continued even though it was so difficult for them.
Right.
So Rabbi Becker, this was amazing. This was so inspiring, so uplifting, and I'm definitely obviously on a personal level to continue, and all of our viewers are gonna either continue or jump into the bandwagon. It's never too late. You can jump in head first.
Never too late. It's never too little. Another quote from him. It's never too late. Never too little.
So we have a minhag, a custom at our Torah Talks program, which is one final message for our broad audience, Rabbi Becker. We had so many amazing insights and history of Daf Yomi. Well, what could you one final grand slam for us?
I was just thinking this story that it happened to my brother. My brother lives in Eretz Yisrael. He used to live in Tel Aviv. He's a Rebbe.
In Tel Aviv?
He used to live in Tel Aviv. Now he's in Ben Brak. So this story happened when he was in Tel Aviv, and he was going to he was in taxi. And if you know Israeli taxis,
they're great.
You become friends with the driver. So he sees this story happens about 40 years ago, and he sees that the driver's an older European man, and they spoke in Yiddish with each other, but he wasn't wearing yarmulke. And he asked him, I'll say it in Yiddish and I'll translate it into English. He said, "Wann kimt der Yid?" He says, "Where are you from?" That's the first thing I always say. Where are you from? So he says, "I'm in a city near Vilna." So that's like my asking you, where are you from? And you say, I'm sitting near Kew Garden Hills. Right. So you're from Kew Garden Hills. I'm not far from, I'm near Kew Gardens, You don't say that. You say I'm from, and he thought that was very strange, but okay. So he a couple times he asked him, he tried in the middle, and he kept giving this answer. Finally, at the end of the ride, they're best buddies. You know how it is.
Wow.
Right?
Yep.
And the Yid turns to me, he says, "I want to tell you the truth. He says, I'm from Radin. And as a small child, I grew up in Radin, and I remember in the city of the Chafetz Chaim. And I remember when I was 12 years old, all the people in the city, when the Chafetz Chaim would walk in the street, all the people in that street, everybody would stand up, and we'd all just look at the Chafetz Chaim. The Jews, the non, everybody just wanted to see the Chafetz Chaim.
The Kedusha, the holiness. Wow.
And he says, I'm embarrassed that a Yid that saw the Chafetz Chaim shouldn't be wearing yarmulke. I want to tell you where I'm from. That's what he told me.
Wow.
Not the end of the story. So I had the schus of speaking in Cincinnati. I was at a good Shabbos of Chazaq, and I was introducing Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, the Rosh Hashiva, the great Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky. Yeah. And after I told the story as an introduction, and my story was that we have Reb Shmuel speaking. Make sure to listen carefully. so Reb Shmuel, first he takes me and he puts me down. He says, "Okay, that's enough."
Yeah. We had Reb Shmuel right over here. I remember we were introducing to. He's like,
yeah. So Reb Shmuel said, "You said that the man was embarrassed." He said, And how do you know after he saw your brother, maybe he did shuv and he put on a yarmulke? So who are you to say that he didn't do it?
Wow.
Maybe he did. And that's the lesson I think we have from the Daf Yomi, what we said before. You know, we look back at the Chafetz Chaim. I remember when I was a Bachur in Yeshiva, there was a man, he used to sit, a regular man, but he used to sit in the front, and the Rosh Yeshiva used to say, give cover to them, and he saw the Chafetz Chaim.
Wow, just seeing the Chafetz
He
Chaim.
saw the Chafetz Chaim. That's enough. That's enough. So I think that when we take a look, and we were talking about knowing the Tanaim, knowing the Amarayim, knowing the Gemara, and we say, you know, whatever age you're at, you know, I missed it, I didn't do it. So we have to take Reb Shmuel's lesson. Doesn't matter. No matter how old you are, you can always put on the yarmulke.
You can always put on the
So
yarmulke, you can always learn, and
the
you always grow.
daf, and every daf you learn is a victory. There's a famous story from Moshe Feinstein, the boxer story. Rabbi Fran told it at the Siyum.
Oh, right.
That they asked the Shaila if you're allowed to learn to make a Siyum on one daf.
Yeah.
Because there was a man who was a boxer who did tshuva and he learned one daf, and then Nebuch he was nifter. And Ramosha said you can make a Siyum on one daf. So every daf is precious. If we do the whole 207.11, that's great. If we do one, but it's all part of the daf and part of Klal Yisrael, and we're all in Klal Yisrael together because the Daf Yomi is the great unifier.
Wow, Rabbi Labish Becker Shlita, what inspiration, what chizuk we just got. Listen, that was out of the world. That is amazing, amazing, amazing. The way the Daf Yomi movement has grown and continues to grow.
We're only in the middle of the
right.
story.
Just the beginning. Just the beginning.
Right.
We haven't even
100
started.
years and we haven't started.
Unbelievable. Chaz Hashem. Berachas Hadiyat Aguda and Rabbi Becker should continue to spread Torah Yom HaKedah to all over the world.
Thank you. I have to thank you for helping me get on Torah anytime. I want to say it in public that you were one of the people who helped me do that.
We want to thank Torah Anytime for their partnership and Aguda and you know, every single Tuesday night Torah Talks with special guest Rabbi Becker. We really enjoyed very, very much. And we want to give a shout out to Daily Giving. A dollar a day goes a very, very long way. We want to remind everyone to join us Tuesday nights at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with special guests, various different topics. And we want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.